All right, I'm going to try and speak slowly with my New Zealand accent. However, at Toxic Trace, we've been busily mapping end to end how toxins that are aware and available in our everyday lives are affecting the nerves inside of our body and potentially compromising what SPARC is trying to achieve. If we share one case study around the formation of PFAS and how one company secretly poisoned the planet. Now, we're all a fan of Teflon and non-stick frying pans, but what this unpacked was a global disaster in terms of forever chemicals which are existing in our bodies, and we don't know how they are affecting us. And as they come under regulatory pressure, we are finding that they are changing the compounds and the molecules to potentially worse compounds. Now, if we look at the presence of these forever chemicals around the world, in the top right, we've got America, where there are known sites all around America. Bottom left, we've got a map of Europe. Now, in this case, dots are not good, and the whole area is basically covered in them. And we've also got data down under in Australia. These are all links which we can click through to those maps. So the system of regulating chemicals is broken. The impacts on our nervous system are unknown, especially the cumulative load, which brings a huge uncertainty to scientific studies. And that's what we're trying to trace. We've considered a range of stakeholders, right through from public sector guardians and regulations, through to platforms like SPARC with academia and research, right down to the consumer and the end user. Now, if we can connect with those consumers and elevate their awareness of what's happening typically behind closed doors and bring up their level of understanding, customers can vote with their wallet and their money to enforce a better, truer system. And we've got growing consumer interest for this. In the top right-hand corner is an image depicting a teaspoon of microplastics in our brain. And what we set out to determine was how impactful some of these are. But as you can see, typically there are buzzwords on the internet which fly around. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, such as PFAS, have been spiking more recently. Back in 2020s, BPA was the topic of discussion, and microplastics have been, consistent sort of in the middle of those trends. So if we look at the typical concentrations or amounts that particularly babies, pregnant mothers, and typical adults are consuming, it can be quite alarming in terms of BPA, PFAS, and phthalates as three potential toxins. Now, what we've got here is in the second row is the weekly consumption based on typical food consumption in New Zealand and the potential loading of these toxins in the food, and then annualizing that number. And what we're uncertain is, what is this impact having on us in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, our lifetime, as these plastics become more prevalent? So to unpack this, Toxic Trace built out a range of features into the SPARC platform, starting off with a health quiz, helping people to detox and connect with medical device companies, understanding how these molecules actually are interacting, and a way for consumers to get engaged with the research to bring in new funding models to enable cutting-edge research to continue. Now, we couldn't quite recreate the SPARC human body with the SVGs that was clickable. So we ended up with our cartoon SVG, which is all clickable. And once you've completed your health assessment quiz, which is a simple range of 7 questions to start with, we end up with health scores on each of our main body organs, such as our brain, our lungs, our heart, our liver, etc. And we're looking into things like how many plastic takeaway containers do they consume, what is the types of diet, and this gives a percentage score through to the health of those organs where plastics can be accumulating. Each of these organs has a Wikipedia page where you can click in and learn how, for example, on this slide, we're looking at BPA impacts the human brain. We also provide detox plans. So what are the ways to get PFAS out of your body? Now, the scientific evidence shows that this is very persistent, limited natural limitation, and we've got studies to support this with a clickable link. Now, there are detox strategies such as probiotics, beta-glucans, saunas, liver enzyme boosters. But what we're seeing is medical device companies exploring things like blood filtration. And even people like Orlando Bloom in June this year spent over $10,000 on blood filtering procedures to remove microplastics from his body because we're unsure what these implications are going to do. So what we set out to do was how do we use these tools to help medical device companies establish better links with consumers and help them fund their development. To do this, we've started unpacking a lot of the misconceptions with what does microplastic in our brain mean, or where else does this impact our human body. So in our structure viewer, we can see in the blue ribbon structure our estrogen receptor, and inside of it we've got an estradiol ligand, which is basically the molecule, and we've got our toxin ligand, which is essentially BPA in this case. Now, seems scary. These compounds line up, they're blocking the estrogen receptor, but what we see is through molecular dynamics and the research is that the BPA binds around 6,000 times weaker than the estrogen. So there should be less of a concern around this particular interaction. In our support research view, we allow people to subscribe to the latest up-to-date research and potentially sponsor tests specifically into certain food items whilst publishing all of this data to the wider public following FAIR principles. And if we look at a very simple and very optimistic projection, if we've got a global population of 7 billion people and we were able to get interest from 0.1% of the global population and they were to contribute $100, that would unlock $700 million of funding, right? We know these numbers are construed, but if we think about the research that we need to develop, how do we attract the appropriate sums of money to get this attraction? Now, we've also got a sidebar, which helps us understand further the particular toxins, the interactions that they have, and also how this impacts the nerves. So we've currently built out 4 toxin cards, such as BPA, and we basically unpack a lot of the affected systems in our body, such as the endocrine system, the reproductive system, the cardiovascular system, the common sources where you can get this plastic into your body, linked again to research papers and additional information. We've taken this further and mapped 11 interactions where we are confident in the comparison between natural ligands, what our body should expect in these receptors, and the toxin complexes, which is sometimes interfering inside our body's cells. Again, we're rating the evidence level on this, and we're building out these 3D models that people can view in more data. And then we also bring this back to how does this affect the nerves, right? What SPARC is predicated and built around. So how does the BPA in the estrogen receptor impact the vagus nerve? Now, this is a lot of really complicated science that we're only able to scratch the surface on, and we would like to delve deeper into these impacts. But we are able to see and link how these toxins that are in people are starting to affect nerve function. So we've got blunted vagal tone, higher systemic inflation, greater metabolic syndrome, and basically we're disrupting the gut, brain, pancreas signaling according to the research. Now, to help modern consumers unpack and understand all of this data, we've also introduced True, which aims to be our source of truth from all of our data, which essentially is a AI-enhanced chatbot to help people understand all of this. And where we're trying to build towards is a project we called STEM Assist, right? So if we can help medical device companies to understand how to better filter and monitor and manage all of these toxins and potentially bring new customers to them to help detoxify their systems, STEM Assist is trying to also work within the SPARC program to be able to potentially stimulate, say, the vagus nerve to enhance the liver functionality to be able to process these toxins itself before, after, or during these processing treatments. And that is a wrap from the Toxic Trace team from New Zealand and a few Kiwis based in Bali. Thank you very much, and we look forward to the judging session.